preparing to live stream to the meeting.
Should I start sharing?
Sure. Yes, you may.
Okay. Hi everyone, good evening. 大家晚上好. Selamat petang saudari-saudara sekalian and huida. So I'm going to share my screen. So welcome everyone to our public lecture series today. Today is our first session. We are also having another session which will be in Chinese on Thursday, focusing on cultural and educational spaces, and another one next Monday, focusing on public buildings and urban politics. But today we are going to look at design processes in terms of heritage architecture and adaptive reuse. So this public lecture is brought to you by Malaysian Institute of Art and Cao Gao Draft. Malaysian Institute of Art is a non-profit making organization. And we at the Interior Design Department offer the Bachelor of Arts in Interior Architecture and Design program. And our syllabus is adopted from our partner university, Birmingham City University. And we adapt it, we localize it to our local context. So the aim of this program is to provide students with the skills to transform or give life to new spaces, as well as to plan and design creative interiors. So for example, what you've seen just now in the video is our assignment for the students this semester, where they have to convert an existing warehouse, Kongsi KL, into a theater space. So just a little bit more about Malaysian Institute of Art. If you're interested in the program, you can look up on our website, which is shown on the right. And on the left, we have our grad show, which is completely curated by our alumni themselves. This batch of students have just graduated a few months ago, and they have a very diverse range of projects. So yeah, to check it out. My colleague will be pasting the link in the comments. And on the other hand, we also have Draft, another organizer of this event. Draft Cao Gao calls itself 马来西亚第一个中文建筑教育媒体, which means that it's the first independent Chinese architectural media in Malaysia. And Cao Gao, among other things, is also going to publish their debut issue by the beginning of next year. So pre-order has already started now. If you're interested, you can also check out the link that will be pasted in the chat box as well. And the topics that will be covered includes how people from, how Malaysians step out of their individual realm into the public realm to voice out their concerns in protests, how architects step out of their comfort zone into other disciplines to address different issues like the climate crisis, the pandemic, and so on and so forth, or community who step out of the limits of the individual into a more communal way of organizing space. So the main theme of this issue will be Tatsulai, stepping out, and Cao Gao also stepped out into this realm of publishing because there was no Chinese media on architecture in Malaysia before. So this is the website of Draft, which I think will be in the link, will be in the chat box. And you can check out more on what the content of the new publication will be, and also place your order over here. So moving on to the theme of our public lecture series, which is going to be held for 1.5 weeks. Our theme is Dissecting Design Processes. We are interested in unpacking the design processes and methodologies of different design practices, shifting the spotlight from more fragmented representations of architecture on the internet and also picture-perfect outcomes that we usually see, to the exploration and experimentation behind it that led to the decision-making process. And this session, we focus on heritage architecture and adaptive reuse. First off, let's look at what heritage is. Heritage refers to the qualities, traditions, and features of life that have been continued over many years and passed on from one generation to another, used especially to refer to things that are of historical importance or that have a strong influence on society. Adaptive reuse, on the other hand, is the process of reusing an old site or building for a purpose other than which it was built or designed for. So just to clarify, adaptive reuse can happen in heritage buildings, but it doesn't have to. It can also be, you can also reuse buildings that are not so much, doesn't have such a high heritage value. It can also be considered as adaptive reuse. So basically the main question that we are going to talk about today is when we have a piece of heritage, when we inherit an existing structure, what are we going to do with it? Like what's the approach? How do we deal with this piece of inheritance? And I just want to share a quote that I really like and have influenced me a lot in terms of my attitude when dealing with heritage architecture. It's from this book, Genius Loci, Towards a Phenomenology of Architecture. So Genius Loci here is a Roman concept, which means the spirit of place. And this book argues that the genius loci denotes or informs what a thing is, what the place wants to be, or in Louis Kahn's words. So Louis Kahn asked the brick what it wants to be. And we, as heritage architects, we can ask the place, ask the genius what it wants to be. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panels today. First off, we have Peter van Velzen from Restaura Architecten. He is also a lecturer at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And he also provides consultancy services to local municipalities while owning his own heritage architecture firm. And next, we will also have Shirley Wu from AIM Architecture, who also formerly worked at Kengo Kuma Associates. She will be sharing 2 adaptive reuse projects that she was involved in these 2 different firms, and we can later on compare and contrast the approach in dealing with adaptive reuse projects in her sharing. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I will stop my sharing and I will pass the floor to Peter. Hi, Peter. Peter, you
unmute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. You can start when you're ready.
You can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, nice. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And Queenie, I'm really proud of you. I remember you entering my studio something like 4 years ago. And I'm amazed if I can see how you developed in the last 4 years. It's nice to see that. In fact, that's also my introduction a little bit. Sorry. I first of all, excuse my poor English because I'm not a scientist. I'm a man from learning by doing. And it's all the story of my life. And I think it was something, my age was something like 31 before I got my master's degree on architecture. And I think it was the age of 40 that I started my own office. But it doesn't matter. I'm still here and I'm still working. And on what you see on your screen is a part in a newspaper that says a restored building is never finished because people always keep developing and they also never finish. And I consider buildings more or less like people. They grow and they grow, especially when it's heritage, because heritage lasts longer than we do. We are just passers-by in a heritage building. So I don't use my own projects. I don't use the projects out of my office. I use one project from students, a group of students I work with in the university in Delft. And I show not all the work of the students, but I first show the project. I show some of the students and I show part of the research, how they did get in their process. The topic they worked on is a dome-formed prison in a Dutch city. It was a studio Master 1 in 2017. And this was the group of students that was there. And I don't show them all. I just make kind of selection on the different approaches. The first 4 weeks of the project, they didn't design at all. They did research. And that's why Queenie also talked about James Loki. We are talking about the DNA of the plot, the DNA of the building, and you have to find out, you do research on different scales. And not the whole group, we did research on all the scales. So if you focus on one part of the research, it provides you a kind of personal guiding theme. And you can see that later on in the designs. You don't need to know everything up to the details. It's if you have your personal fascination, it gets more interesting. So I show you something from 5 different persons and their different approaches. And we use not a conceptual theme, we use a guiding theme. It's just guiding you through. You keep following your own path. The first one I share is by a Greek student called Electra, and she discovered the layers of time. I will scroll quickly through her research because it's a lot, it's very deep, it's very thorough. It's about all kinds of aspects. At the left, you see our value matrix we use in Holland on different aspects and different values to find out what kind of values there are and how you compromise that and how you make that compact into your choices. But there are personal values on all parts of buildings, and they are different for different parts of the building. You can see it's a complex of different forms closed by a wall because it's a prison. Small study on the program, but the program is not leading. The buildings are leading. Important in designing heritage and being a re-architect is that you don't reshape the building in order to fit in your program. The most important thing is that you rearrange and reorder your program in order to fit it the best way into the building without changing the building, without morphing the building. Because then to do that, you need the identities of the building. And then you can combine it. You can see that in this diagram. Even more research and research. They did research for something like 4 weeks. They wanted to design, but they were not allowed to design yet. But then it's happening, and then it's forming, and there are kind of lines disappearing, and they are appearing in their design. And in the end, there's a kind of layer of connection buildings in this direction, and in the vertical direction, there are connections to the city. That's mainly the design for this one. On this diagram, you see that all the kind of aspects that are important when you design on heritage. And it's a circular process. It's not a linear process. You always check on all the aspects and all the layers and all the levels of your design. Another student, Lucia, she started not from the outside, not with the city. She started with a dome-shaped prison itself. It's an intern space. And you have to do something because it's an empty, large space. It's the circular form. There were only cells on the outside, and the inside was a panopticon, and when you can just guard all the prisoners. And you have to do something with it. Do you keep it empty or not? You see all kinds of studies, and finally a design strategy, conditions, problems, ideas, identity, all these things are there, but you need to do something because they had to find out if they can host a kind of university in the buildings complex. And her suggestion was already kind of solution instead of design philosophies. Just try to find out if you can make a winter garden. Make it very public. It's an iconic form. You solve a lot of problems and you keep all your values. And you check that in your design and you check it if it works in your sketches with small volumes put into it. When is it too much? You check when there are busy people. You work with colors, you do the routing of all the things. Make sure it's this kind of center. You're sketching on it. But quite the opposite of this is Claudia. She mainly walked around and she focused on the in-between spaces between all the buildings. Claudia was very poetical one. She quotes poetic people, she quotes pictures, she quotes all kinds of emotional things, completely different from a lot of other students. But you find out the in-between spaces as the quality, because the in-between spaces, they give identity, they have to make the connection between all the buildings. This is a historical floor plan. And she analyzed it on a technical way with axes to try to find out where you can build new axes in the in-between space. How does it fit into the city? Will it connect? Where do I need openings to connect and to break open the wall? And then suddenly there are reference pictures of poetical things and emotional things. And there are technical things working with the grid. So she is going around from one side to the other and back again between all kinds of layers, all kinds of atmospheres, all kinds of strategies on designing. But the concept was not yet there. But does it matter? Queenie uses the social interaction, connecting not the building, connecting not the in-between space, but try to find out what's important in the city and what will be the role in the city for the new building. And of course, that was the first impression. She found out that there are a lot of important social spots in the city, and the prison is next to it. So it's very well connected. You find out what kind of festivals and happenings there are in the city that you can use, and when are they during the year. And you find out that in the summer break of the university, you can use public things. Kind of schedule for the whole year. How can you fit that into a prison building? And there are a lot of aspects about light, about privacy, about values. And you get sketching. You try to divide all things and what happens in the center. And finally, all the permanent functions are around. And there are functions in the cells, but also there is the things to fill in on festivals. And the festivals are on the public inside. So not a winter garden like Lucia did, but totally changing, all the time changing from one to the other. What happens if there are fairs or things like that? What happens if there is something where you have to pay for a ticket? What happens if you support different kind of things? And then another student, he focused only on the prison wall around the complex, because if you don't break the wall or you don't open the wall, you'll never will be able to connect the prison with the rest of the city. So the wall is important, but the device, it has the building has to change from to keep the people out and to keep the people in, and then opening it up. How can you do that? Smart scheme on how to narrow down the things you want to do and how to organize your program and organize your design study. There was already one opening broken because there were already placemaking activities. The prisoners were already gone. And he did an analyzing all the work and all the walls, because not all the walls are the same. Don't tell a story. And of course, there is the program to fit in, but there is the approach, and try to find the official approaches and new approaches. And that's how far he got in that point. And to keep it in mind, it's not so easy because I have to scroll quickly through all the designs. I go in reverse order again through the thing. So Federica continues in the midterm presentation. Then we are something like 3 or 4 weeks working on designing. So it's compact. The ideas are falling in places. And she starts sketching on things. She did research on how to open it without making it complete open or break through. And she discovered what she called the membrana, that is Spanish for membrane. Membrane, you know, is something that's closed, but things can go through in air or in people or in water, but it keeps close identity without being closed. So that's the identity she discovered, and that's the main focus on that design in the midterm presentation. Queenie just resumes and continues on the path he was already doing. Also make it compact what she already did, show everything she did, and continue in filling it in, designing things, organize the functions, making sketches on where to break to or to connect, and already started on technology things we also have to solve. And Claudia, what about Claudia? She continues her journey through the wide variety on things, but it's getting there. And there were happening kind of concept for transformation. You see it on the right top. And there were 3 things, 3 aspects, that is coexisting, so exist as a building next to the dome, touching, make something new that touches the building, and colliding, design something new that penetrates the building and connects the building, and give them different functions. And these 3 approaches, they ask for different design ways, but it's a very interesting way of designing, and especially to keep it clear. But it's difficult to keep focus on keeping it as clear as it is. And then it gets technical drawings and smart, what she calls sneaky backdoors. You discover things in buildings. And you get fragmented visuals, but very nice visuals that gives you the atmosphere without a complete looking through the design. But sometimes we were wondering, is it still clear? Is it coherent? And it's completely different from our Lucia is ahead on schedule, but also drawing, still drawing. It doesn't stop. You keep sketching, you keep drawing, because your fingers always tell better what your mind is thinking than when there is a mouse and a computer in between, I think. And then the visuals, they are also sketches with color. But there was already a complete, worked out, detailed design with all the elements inside, a very organized design. It almost looked like she did the final presentation. So I was very secure that she will get there. But what about Claudia? So we don't show all the final product, but there is a booklet from Claudia. I read it afterwards, and it was very clear, in fact. So a small booklet, and read the first 4 lines. I was confused and amazed by the collage of different shapes, materials, and sizes of rooms. Striking how much these rooms shape and cause each other on multiple layers. You see, it's about feelings, it's about emotions. But then there are again writers, painters. She quotes. It's too much to read, but you can read it later on. And of course, there is the official architectural approach on designing the program and organizing it. And there is again a picture that tells her, not for everybody visible, but she tells us, she feels what the picture tells about in-between spaces. The in-between spaces, they make in fact the picture and not the objects itself. Sometimes my computer is, because the drawings of her are heavy. And you see there are basic sketches, and there is mainly Photoshop images of atmospheres. But it's getting clear, and it's a lot of work. And then in the end, there are the conceptual things you expect usually at the start. And maybe it was already in her mind, but not yet, not able to write it out. But in the end, they were there. In her language, the tangente, the passante, and the secante. And still you get these kind of sketches. And to show that she's also able to, the last poster is very heavy, so it takes a while. I'll show you part of her final poster. That was too quick. And you can see it's all there in a technical way, so you expect students to do in a technical university. So you can start with a very poetical and emotional things and end in technical drawings. So that's, it looks like I succeed in managing to get more, almost 180 slides through within the time. But what are my conclusions? My conclusions are there are different paths you can use in design processes. There are complete different solutions, and they are all valid, and they all have quality, and they all work as well as they do. And maybe in real life you have to combine these things. Maybe if the studio would be an architectural firm, they will for sure make perfect designs and will be on the top of when there are selections to be made. And what I think it's important that I find out what is the personal quality, what's the identity of the person, because emotions and experience in your mind, they are very personal. Use them, because that makes you different from the rest. Never try to copy other people. You can use copies of things, but always try to use it your own identity. And another aspect is that we remember that there was another studio where there were large architectural designs, icons to design, huge interventions with architectural vocabulary that much. In our studio, it wasn't. And I asked to my students, why didn't you do that? Then they said right away, we don't need that. We don't need that to show the quality of the building. We don't need architectural interventions to get it used again and to experience the buildings as they are. Then you have to be polite. If you are polite, the building still will be leading. And I think that's one of my main goals, that if I do my job properly, you can't see a thing. Sometimes it's very frustrating because there was an opening of an heritage project and it costed something like 2 million euros. And at the opening of the building, some people asked to me, well, I heard you invested 2 million euros. Where did you put it? I can't see it. And I said, thank you for the compliment. Because that's what you have to do. And I think that's quite different from new architectural world. They have to be polite. I think that's it for now. Thank you. I stop sharing.
Thank you, Peter. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or type your questions in the chat box. Some students will be asking questions actually. Some of them are assigned to ask questions, so please do raise your question. So in the meantime, while waiting for other questions, I also have some questions for Peter. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you are a man of learning by doing. So I was curious about how your practice influenced your teaching and how your teaching influenced your practice. Like, how do they intersect?
I think, first of all, as well as in my practice as in university, I work with young people. Young people, they have fresh minds. And the students, they help me in keeping my view as open as possible. Always try to find out the extreme limits, because you know where your limits are when you go over your limits. Otherwise, you stay too safe in designing things. And that's something important for students to learn, that you search for your limits. And of course, in your real practice, you have to slow down a little bit, but always, if you know the extreme solutions, it will help you in convincing your client to go out of your comfort zone, to go beyond your comfort zone and try to find other solutions that you don't think of right away. I think that's one of the important things I learned from that.
But how does your practice influence your teaching then?
I don't know if it influences. It influenced me in quickly analyzing and in quickly communicate on all the different levels. I think that's the important way. Yeah. And I think they will be different. Your life is more interesting if you got very different approaches and different circumstances and different worlds you are living in.
Yeah.
And that keeps your mind free. You're not bothered. You don't get frustrated if you're all in the same habitat. So I like very much doing 3 roles: switching.
Mhm. Speaking of diverse approach, I think looking at the presentation and also being at that studio personally by myself, I thought it was very interesting that everyone started with the same building that was very rigid and has a very strong character on its own. And given the same brief, like everyone has to design a university out of it. But then the diversity in the approach and the outcome was so huge. I was wondering, as an educator, do you think this diversity is important, and why do you think this diversity has occurred in this studio? What have you done to encourage this level of diversity?
Yeah, I think it's very important because you get a very much broader view on solutions if I force you into different approaches. And I did it in different ways. For instance, if at some points I organized students to work in duos, work together on their own design, but giving peer review on each other. And then in that point, I don't choose two similar students. I choose them yin-yang in order to concentrate on a quite different approach. I think it was at the midterm, I let them present your yin-yang duo design. So tell the story from another person's design. And that helps you in thinking differently, thinking the other way around. If you, for instance, a very technical, straight person has to tell the story of the poetical stories of Claudia, you have to put your mind into the mind of the other. And I think it helps you in broadening your view and finding out what you really are and what you want to do.
There's a question in the chat. In your opinion, is it that important to always have a picture perfect, complete project when designing architecture?
In university, not. Because there is so much that you can do a lot of work in making it complete, but then it's all at the middle level. And I think it's more important that you can excel on some points to show your personality and to show your ideas. And of course, we know that you can produce a lot of paper to make it complete. But if I always say, I should show my finger, if the average level is over here, I show you only the things at the top. Because if your spectators are looking at the things at the top, they don't bother the things that are low.
So essentially focusing on what is strong about the project and then pushing that point to the limit instead of focusing on what is weak.
Focus. Right. That and focus on specific things that they can remember you on. Not always they remember your name, but most of the time they remember your design. And if you have your guiding theme continuously there, it helps you in keeping your mind straight, but also people that they remember you on your social interaction, for instance, Queenie.
There's also a question in the chat. What, in your opinion, what is your biggest challenge during your design process? It can be any project in your personal design process.
I think the most important thing is to find out the values and to find out the DNA of the complex and of the building, and how to use that at the maximum to fit in a new program. But the research phase, you have to do thoroughly, and you can never do that much. And I think you have to take your time for that, and don't forget, it's the most important thing. So sometimes you have to walk again through your building and go again to your building and go again to your building. And sometimes, I think that's the most important thing. And then start with thinking let people talk and think for themselves how to fit in their program. Just go visit a room, sit there for a while and talk with your client. What are the qualities of this space? Where is it suitable for? What can you do in this spot? And then it's our job to arrange it in a logical way, but we have to find out first that people decide what they see and what they feel and what they experience in the building.
On that note, there's a question from Gwen. Is there something that measures if the design is successful respecting a heritage project?
Again?
Is there something that measures if the design is successfully respecting a heritage project?
It's not.
How do you measure whether it's successful?
I think if you succeed in keep all your values there, that's a kind of measurement. But there is always a gray scale in things you do keep there, but are not of a high value. And it's always a balance because always when you do a reuse of a building, you lose values, but you get values back. And as an architect or as something when you have to design, you have to think, okay, it's a balance. I throw things away, but what do I get back for it? And if the things that I get back for it have so much value, you can accept you also lose some things because you get new things that give continuation on the life of the building. You have to make sure that your interventions have the quality of the things that were already there.
On that note, right? For everyone's reference, the image that Peter has shown just now, some of them are color coded in red, green, and yellow. That was a technique that we have learned in the Heritage Studio to actually evaluate the values of that certain part. So red is for something that is very important. And then after that, it's yellow. And then green is something that is least important. So if you have to demolish something that is red, you have to have a very strong justification of why you want to demolish it, because that is something of very high value. And we also have a matrix. So if you pay attention to the slides, there are some slides where there's a matrix with different aspects of the building. That is also a system that we use to evaluate the values that is important in the building. I think that was a starting point for a lot of us in the studio. So moving on, there's a question from Yu Heng. Since we noticed that the presentation is showing on redesigning heritage building, may I ask what is the balance that the design do not actually overcover the historical building, but at the same time bring new things to the building? What's the balance of not overpowering it, but also bringing new life to it? Yeah.
I think if you are polite and if you manage to design new additions that can be taken away, is it reversible? That's an important question. Yeah. That is an important question you have to ask yourself, and you have to ask in your design. Are the things, the interventions you are doing, are they reversible? And if they are reversible, it's easier to accept them because you can go back. And if you do interventions, do them on the lowest value parts. For instance, in the Dome prison, some walls were repaired extremely. So it's not that much of a problem to take these parts away if you keep the original parts as they are.
Are there any questions from the chat that I have missed? How to stay passionate and inspired as a designer?
By being a tutor for a while, because they give you so much energy, and they give you so much new ideas, fresh ideas. I think it's the most valuable part of my life that I, by accident, became a tutor. I never intended to be a tutor. And at first, I remember I was mostly interested in the designs, but later on, I was much more and more interested in the development of the people, of the persons as a people, that they grow. In 3 months' time, you see them change from a very shy foreign student to a very confident student. And that gives me so much energy. And the other part of the energy is if you did a redesign of a building and you see people using it, and you see people happy in the building. Because then I came back to one of my important quotes I still forgot. You know, the British man Winston Churchill. He was a politicus, but he knows also something about buildings. He said, and it's a quote, "We shape the buildings, but afterwards the buildings, they shape us." So we have an important task, that we make buildings that shape people afterwards. And if you see that happening, last weekend I was in my own Sodafabriek building and there was an event, and I saw there so much people enjoying life, enjoying food, enjoying music, and I get very emotional, and that gives me so much energy. I can continue for weeks on that kind of events.
Yeah, I can relate with students giving me energy. So thank you, students, for giving me energy. There's also a question about, there's someone who is interested in, hang on, let me look for it. There's someone who is interested in the €2 million project where the client didn't see the outcome. Can you describe a little bit more of that project?
Well, I don't remember exactly. It was a kind of a big warehouse changed into a workshop for carpenters that were building on Dutch windmills. It was a very technical one without any interventions, but it was the technical state of the building was very low. It was so we had to repair a lot, we had to renew a lot, and if you repair wooden constructions with second-hand wood, you can make it old, look old, but it costs you more than when you do it with new wood. I think that was the one that we did.
So is there any changes to the function of the windmill, or is it still functioning as a windmill?
The windmills usually in that city, in the center of Schiedam, they are still functioning as a windmill. But there is also one as a visitor center, but there is also one as a museum, and there is also one, but they are all secondary functions. They have to function because you show the mechanism of the windmill. And that's the most important thing you have to do.
Yeah. There's another question. Thanks, DW says, thanks for the talk. It is mentioned that you pride yourself in the architectural intervention be indistinguishable from the historical fabric. I wonder if the approach may unintentionally then fall into making a building resistant to change rather than resilient with changes. Is the building being able to adapt and adopt to changes in modern requirements?
Not always. It's always difficult to find if you can adapt it to other climates, but the climate itself is not a problem. I think the use and the need for people to have a specific climate inside a building, that is troubling me a lot, because it's we have Dutch winters and we have Dutch summers, and you need to keep the heat out, but you also need the heat in, and you have to always, it's very difficult to decide if you have the need for insulation. Do you put it on the inside, or do you put it on the outside, or you can hide it somewhere in between? But it's always a different task. I got one building, and for the first 7 years, we just decided to have a winter stop, because we didn't find out how to accommodate people in the building for the winter. Just say, okay, accept it as it is. Put on an extra coat or something like that. Yeah, it's always like that. People have to adapt yourself to the building and not adapt the building to your needs to keep a constant climate.
There's another question. I think you have briefly touched on it, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. The question is, what is the biggest challenge you have faced throughout your years as an architect, and how did you overcome them?
I think my biggest challenge was to have an historical building of my own and try to reuse that. And it was very difficult because it was a huge challenge, because it was empty for 40 years. And I bought it for €1.
€1?
Yeah.
Wow.
But if you see now, you still think it's worth €1, but I invested my whole pension fund in that. So there is already something like €500,000 invested in that building, and you can't see a thing. And it's still partly unused and not usable for anything. And that's my challenge at the moment. And I'm just working there on my own. And that was the picture, the newspaper picture you saw at the start. I was on the roof of that building working myself. But if you work by hand, some days it gives you energy and inspiration for the design tasks you have next to it.
So you physically work on the building by yourself?
Yeah. I did a kind of sabbatical, and I just worked there and spent all my time over there.
So you're not just the architect, but you're also the builder?
Yeah.
And the occupant as well?
Yeah. I know how to work with wood. I know how to weld steel to each other, all the things that I learned by doing in my life.
That's very nice. I've just sent the link of Soda Fabric to the chat if anyone's interested in checking out the building that Peter was talking about.
You can, if you want to see more and follow it, you follow it on Instagram.
Yeah, I sent the Instagram link.
Nice. Thank you. I'm proud of it.
There's another question by Zoe. How do you balance or design the beauty, quote unquote, as perceived by the public, and the beauty as if you think it is? So for example, there may be a big difference between the beauty as how you perceive it and the beauty that is perceived by the public. So how do you balance or design this beauty?
Then you get in a very wide discussion. What is beauty? What is beauty? Yeah. And when I have discussions about beauty, I sometimes compare designing old buildings with female people. Do you like people that uses a lot of Botox or not? I don't. And if I have discussions with my clients, I always keep that same comparison on their discussion, on their mind. And then it's very easy. You just say, okay, no, that's too much. You are renewing too much. You are Botoxing the building. And we have one Dutch female everybody knows that is too much Botox on, and everybody says she's ugly. So a very well preserved old lady is much more worth than a Botoxed old lady that wants to look young, like young lady. But I think that's, if you keep that in mind, for me it was easy to make the balance between renewing, changing, and keep the old identity.
So in essence, if the building is 100 years old, you want it to look like it's 100 years old. You don't want to look like it's 50 or 20 years old.
Right, right. But there can be some new interventions. There can be new layers. You can combine to each other to give it another chapter in the life of the building. The building, the history of the building continues.
I'm just curious because when you presented, there's a very wide range of approaches and differences among the approaches of different students. But in your opinion, are there any main similarities among the approaches? Because of your guidance, is there like a flavor of Peter or color of Peter in these assignments that makes them different from other assignments or makes them unique to you, to your group?
I think being polite, the modesty of having respect for the building. I think that's the main line that you keep as much as possible there and use the existence as much as possible instead of adding your own design additions to it. The studio you were in was very good in that.
That's nice to know.
Yeah, but it's also, we also realized that it was a very difficult building, the dome form, because the open space is important. And if you fill it or you change it, it's very difficult to make from a very closed inside building, very much into its mind, into an open building.
Okay. Are there any more questions in the chat that I have missed? If so, can you repose your question? Because there are quite a lot. For the designing stage, do you think physical models are important? And what can we study on those models other than just using sketches and also collage methods to inspire your idea? I think that the question is like, what, how do you, like, if you create a physical model, how do you study your own model other than just sketching and collaging?
We use the physical models mainly for doing research on details of connection old and new. I think more important is in my youth, we were designing on paper. Later on, we got AutoCAD and we designed on 2D. And I think it's the most important thing is that you, from the start designing in 3 dimensions. It doesn't matter if you do it in ArchiCAD or you do it in Revit or you do it in SketchUp, whatever, but do it in 3 dimensions in your design, in your drawings, even in the sketchy way. Because my experience that in my design studios always, I think a few years ago, half of the students was designing in 3D and half the students was designing in 2 dimensions. And all the 3D students, they get to a very much more quality, detail, because all the old buildings, it's about the spatial experience. And the spatial experience, you have to see and you have to feel and you do that the best when you design in 3D. And I think the model is getting, the physical model is getting, for that reason, a bit less important. And we use it only for details, or you won't succeed in working it in your SketchUp or your other digital model.
I would like to add a little bit on that actually, because the details of connection of the old and new parts of the building is always given the most attention. Even during the crits, like everyone will be asking, okay, where is the connection between your old and the new? Because on one hand, it's where you start to intervene. It's where you start to like scratch the old building and do something on it. But on the other hand, it's also where what Peter mentioned just now, the thermal bridge starts to happen because of Dutch weather is very cold. So they are very particular of thermal bridges. And if the connection is not done in a good way, that is where the heat escapes during the winter. So it's very important to design that connection between the old and the new. Howren asked a question. What type of material is recommended to use in the heritage building without destroying the original building? or maybe how do you decide what kind of material to use?
I think you use mainly different kind of materials. There is no rule for using a different material. Another studio, there was a nice experiment because there was a co-tutor who was a specialist on wood design, in designing in wood constructions. And we designed in that studio, it was about the building, completely built with bricks, glass, and of course wood constructions. But we forced the students all to design in wood. And we design, and don't use bricks, don't use stucco, don't use steel as much, don't use too much glass. Make a visible wooden construction. And it was also there because there were some students, a Chinese student who did some research in China on wooden construction. So afterwards, I just started it as in a kind of didactical idea. But afterwards, I realized that all the designs, they were completely different as they were in the Kuppel, but they get, by the choice of the different material, a lot of respect for the old building without competing to that, without overwhelming the old building. So sometimes it can be an idea to use another material without making the contrast too high.
Okay, I think that's it for our discussions. If there are any more questions, you can still ask them in the chat because we have another Q&A session later. But for now, we will go into our photo taking session before we go into the break. So can everyone turn on your cameras if it's okay with you, and then we'll take a group photo. This is the best we can do in a virtual setting. Hi, turn on your cameras. And I think Gwen will be helping with taking the photos. Thanks, Gwen.
No worries.
Give us a heads up when to smile and
Everyone, don't be shy. Turn on your cameras.
we have 3 pages.
Okay, I'll start taking the pictures. So everyone get ready to your pose in 3, 2. Okay, give me a sec. Wait. Should I take each pages a few times?
Yeah.
All right. All right, again, 1, 2. Okay, please hold, that. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Gwen. So thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Peter, for your sharing. If anyone has more questions for Peter, you can still keep it in the chat. We will address them maybe in the second Q&A session. But in the meantime, we will have a 5-minute break for everyone to grab your tea or coffee for Peter. And we will be back in 5 minutes for Shirley's sharing. All right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. But please don't leave the Zoom room. Like just leave physically and then come back in 5 minutes. Yeah. All right. Thank you. See you later. Hi, is everyone back? So thanks for staying for those of you who were here, and for those of you who came in a little bit late, welcome. And just now we had our session with Peter van Velzen. He's a heritage architect from the Netherlands and also a lecturer at the University of Delft in technology. So if you are interested in the lecture, but you miss a little bit of it, or you miss that part of it, you can head on to our YouTube to watch the replay later. But now we are going to move on with Shirley's lecture. Hi, Shirley.
Hi, Queenie.
Hi. Thanks for coming. So Shirley is an architect who works in AIM Architecture in Shanghai. She also has working experience with Kengo Kuma and Associates, also in Shanghai. And she will share us two adaptive reuse projects that she was involved in. So hi, Shirley, passing the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna share screen first. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me switch to full screen. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Queenie, for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here this evening to share with everyone in this group two past projects in Shanghai that I've worked on. One at my former practice in Kengo Kuma and Associates, and the other project at AIM Architecture, which I'm with now. So here's an overview of the two projects. The image that you see on the left is a project called Shipyard 1862. It is an architecture and interior renovation of an abandoned shipping warehouse. And the other project on the right, a very different project, is called In the Park. It's also in Shanghai. It is an interior design project for a local fashion retail. So actually the two projects are of very different nature and scales, but I think they both suit today's topic, which on one hand it is in heritage, and the other project is actually also about adaptive reuse. So before I start with the projects, I think maybe it's good to introduce about how the two practices have very different approaches of design. Well, I guess most of you would know actually Kengo Kuma, Japanese architect, he has a very strong personal philosophy for his design works. And he always describes his work as negative architecture, which means actually to minimize the presence of buildings and to dissolve them in their context. So when we worked on his projects, we always approach with more or less a coherent language, which is like modularization or fragmentation. While actually in AIM, where I'm working at now, the approach is quite the opposite, because we don't really believe in a fixed style, but we want every project to respond to clients' needs, to the context, and to have its very own unique identity. So in AIM, actually, all kinds of design approaches are possible, and the design aspect is much broader. So let's start with the first project, Shipyard 1862. Actually, the project name already explains its past identity. The history of the building dates back to 1860s, when it was built as a major ship maintenance warehouse. It's located in an area in Shanghai, which was at that time still an industrial port. And then in the 1990s, the whole area slowly transformed into the now prestigious CBD of Shanghai, which is Lujiazui. So the building, as you can see, it is actually a very important harbor facility. It marked an important milestone of the shipping industry in China. But later, as this area slowly developed into a financial heart, all these shipping industries and facilities slowly moved away. So the warehouse is sort of left alone there. It lost its identity in the very new unknown context. So this is the condition of the warehouse when we were commissioned the project. You can see that it's actually a very long, a very horizontal building. It's around 200 meters in length. And it has a very typical arched structure, arch shape, and masonry brick facade, which is like most of the industrial warehouse from the past. And most of the interior parts had already been demolished, so remaining only the building skeleton and skin. We think actually the existing structures are really beautiful, so we really want to retain them as much as possible during the transformation process. So the question of design for this project is really about how to reach a balance between the old and the new.
Sorry, Shirley, are you changing slides?
Yes, can you?
Because
Can
we
you
are
see-
looking at your first slide.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maybe let me stop sharing and do it again.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Can you see the slide with the master plan now?
Yeah.
And
Maybe you
does it
can
move-
quickly go through the few slides before because we missed them.
Okay, so you see them sliding now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just quickly go back. So this is where I explained the two different approaches from the two practices. And that's some historical images of warehouse. Can you see them now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And this is the condition of the building when we were commissioning the project. So you see a lot of interior parts already demolished, and the building is actually a very long horizontal one. So the transformation is actually not only about this building itself. The shipyard is actually part of the whole waterfront redevelopment of the CBD of Shanghai. So what comes with it, surrounding it, is actually new residential towers, commercial, and offices. So because shipyard is special in a way that it has its historical identity, and it also has this face that a more recreational side actually that faces the waterfront. And on the south side, which is more urban, it faces a new development. So this building becomes an important cultural and commercial hub to the entire waterfront stretch. And with the new master plan, there are two important urban axes, this diagonal one on the left and this straight one here. These two are main axes that would connect the building to the road network on the south. So when it comes to the planning of the space, we decided to bring in these two axes to directly cut into the building as atriums, which you see on this plan in blue color. And this atrium on the east also marks the boundary between the commercial part of the building, which is in red, and the purple part, which is an 800-seat theater. And actually the theater was a bit extended out because the original building structure could not hold the capacity that is expected to hold. And in this plan, we actually also introduced a linear space in yellow here. We call it the street. It is actually where a row of old concrete columns from the original warehouse would stand. So we want to bring in this linear void here to really celebrate these old structures as if they are ornaments themselves. So as I've said before, the project is very much about finding a balance for the old building in its new contemporary setup. So before we started designing, we actually carried out a very careful documentation of all the old artifacts and the existing textures of the building. For example, we would identify the colors of the old bricks with color palettes, and we would check for any intact pieces that are demolished from the old buildings that we think have a possibility of being reused. So a lot of them actually seem like they have no use in first glance, but in the later of the design process, we brought back a lot of them to life. And the facade design has also been a challenge because we have to respect Kengo Kuma's philosophy in terms of trying to dissolve the building into its context. So at the same time, we also want to retain its identity, its past identity as an industrial warehouse. So what we decided to do with the facade is that we create a very soft screen of bricks that would flow in front of a glass curtain wall. And all the bricks here are actually new bricks that are customized in their required dimension, required profile and colors to fit into the new curtain wall system. And to study the pattern of these bricks also involved a bit of computational design. We looked at how the bricks are distributed, whether it's more like a gradual spread of clouds, or if we want to have an overall change of that of density from one side to another. So computational design had also been helpful in the randomization process and in distributing the different colors of brick in a more natural way. So in that sense, we don't end up having a brick facade that looks very hard or artificial. So during the construction stage, we also made a one-to-one mock-up of the facade on the site. So this kind of physical mock-up is really useful in terms of understanding our design in real scale and also understanding the effects of light and other impacts from the environment. For instance, in this mock-up, we learned that the metal hardware of the curtain wall is actually under very serious reflection, especially on the west side. So after seeing the mock-up, we would tell the construction team to try to paint all the metal hardware in dark gray in order to avoid having these shiny little dots all over the facade. And actually inside the mock-up, we can also walk up different levels. So in that sense, we don't just understand the facade from an external point of view, but actually we can be inside on different levels and understand it from an interior perspective. Then we can learn if the bricks are being too small or if they're too dense and block the views a lot. When it comes to the interior design, we really try as much as we can to largely retain the existing artifacts. So we wanted to keep any new interior finishes as simple or the least decorative as they can be. So we made this material boards for our client, and we actually only worked around with very few materials, like you can see in the rendering, concrete flooring, and then we have stainless steel mesh for all the commercial balustrades. And the wall finishes are mostly either dark metal or galvanized metal. So this middle image I showed just now, it is a rendering of the linear commercial street. So here you can see this row of concrete columns. They are all the old structures from the original warehouse. So we really brought in this linear void so that the columns will stand as if they are ornaments themselves. And we only want to celebrate them in terms of light to create this kind of solemn atmosphere in the interior. And this image on the right, it is an interior rendering for the pre-function space of the theater, which has at the back, that's an original brick wall from the past. So the whole point of interior design here is really to enhance the strong industrial ambience that the old architecture already offers. Along the design process, we've made a lot of physical models to learn about different topics, different aspects. This image on the left is a partial model we made to study the theater in terms of the scale in relation to the existing structures. And we also try to apply material on it. Well, it's not the real material that we have, but we would use paint or metal wire to mimic the real material we have to understand the whole space in different aspects. And in comparison, the photo on the right is the real outcome of the theater. So here you can see these huge pipes on two sides. They're actually recycled from the old building. And now they're brought back to life again. Now they function as ventilation equipment in the theater space. And we've also made a lot of other physical models. For instance, in the public washroom, we want to create this very light floating wash basin in folded steel plate. So we also made a series of models to study like how much is folded, the slope and the water flow of it. And this is another physical model we made to study actually a light installation in one of the atriums. So in this atrium of 4-story high, we wanted to create a luminous floating object that hangs naturally from the roof. And we decided to use optic fibers so that there is no need for additional lighting fixtures to it. And so we made actually not just this model, we made a series of different models to study the shape of these catenary lines, how they look from different hanging positions and of different lengths. And we also received real samples of this optic fiber to test the lighting effect in our office. And the image on the right is the final outcome of it, which is very light, and we were really satisfied of how it looks. And I've said earlier on when we began the project, we made a very detailed documentation of the old artifacts because in the end, a lot of them can be reused again. So here you see this very fun, playful signage system in the warehouse, which is actually done by reassembling all these old abandoned pipes that we see on site. And it happens that like a lot of these pipes, by nature, they have all these turning arms, which work really well in terms of navigating people in space. And of course, we also designed a major landscape installation that says the name of the project. Again, it was done by these turning or bending metal pipes in order to be in a consistent language with the other signages. And since this installation was meant to stand in a public plaza, we also did a structural analysis to determine which points of this installation probably will be weak and need further reinforcement, just in case people would lie on it or kids would climb over it. So here are a few images of the final outcome. These are the new facade where screens of floating bricks hang in front of a clear glass curtain wall. And the left one here is facing an urban plaza on the west side. And this one here on the right image is actually the envelope of the theater space. So I think it has been quite successful in representing the old building, its old tactility in a contemporary way. And a few interior shots. So from left to right, the atrium space where we hang this lighted optic fiber. And again, in the middle of this commercial street where these old structure celebrated along the void. And also the image on the right is actually one of my favorite moments of the building. It is a west-facing balcony on the fourth floor that receives shadow from the brick curtain wall in late afternoon. So that's a lot about the old warehouse. Now let's move on to a very different project, but also a very fun project. It is recently completed in Shanghai as well. It's called In the Park. So I've mentioned this is an interior project for a local fashion brand. They are called In the Park. And before we arrived at any design concept, we tried to understand as much as we can, like the brand's DNA and what vision the client has for this store, what they plan to do or plan to sell in their store. So In the Park is actually a multi-branded buyer store. That means that they would collect interesting products from various local or foreign brands and sell them in one space. And for this store that we are designing in particular, they wanted to operate it almost like a department store with different themes So it's not only about fashion, it's also about magazines, it's also about coffee, music, and they will also sell groceries in the store. Having understood what our clients' need was, we then decided to name our concept with this word, Wunderkammer. Wunderkammer is a German word that means the cabinet of curiosities. So we wanted it to be a space of diversity where eclectic products are displayed at every corner of the space. And also inspired by the brand's name in the park, we wanted the space to be like a park bazaar. So this already actually starts to suggest some sort of outdoor, urban, street style mood for the project. This is the location of the project, is in downtown Shanghai. Is on the street level of an office complex in a quite quiet neighborhood actually, but it is still easily accessible from the main streets. And you can already see a corner of it from the main street actually. And this is how the space was like in its previous conditions. We were told that this space has already undergone a few extensions, which end up with a very messy grid of columns interrupting the space. You can tell from the plan, these columns are sort of different grids that merge together. And it's probably because of this complicated or difficult spatial conditions that had left the store empty for all the time. There has been no tenant despite of the low price of it. And the space has also a mezzanine level here. Very weirdly, it doesn't have any staircase that connects to the main space. So it's all like cut off. And this is the second level of the space. So actually the whole store has these different levels that are very fragmented. But on the upper levels though, you can see that it's actually surrounded by very rich greenery from the trees in the context. So this environment did inspire us later on in creating a park-like space for the upper levels of the store. So what concerned us and what concerned the client the most was how to design a staircase that can lead customers to not only to the different levels, but actually to every corner of the space. So we have to find a way to bring all these fragmented levels together. So for that, we made a series of diagrams to explain a step-by-step spatial strategy. We introduced a red curvy staircase with a floating platform in the high space on the first level. And for us, the staircase is actually not only for circulation. We wanted it to also be, it's like a spectacular object highlighted in the entire store, almost like a big colorful slide that you can see in the middle of a playground. And there's also this concept which made us think of the staircase as a major slide, so it has all these curvy forms and a fluidity with it. So after connecting all the levels, we started to define each zone with different themes and materials. For the first floor, we named it the concrete jungle because of the fact that all these tall and messy columns stand. And here we decided to have a black asphalt floor, which would merge naturally to the outdoor grounds. And the mezzanine here, we named it the flood. And that's exactly where the red color from the staircase would organically spill over the entire floor. And here is also where we want to create a visual climax as people wander through the store. And finally, on the upper floor, it has the theme of a playground. It is the nice area which is surrounded by trees, and it will be paved in outdoor bricks. And in contrast to the outdoor urban setup of the store, we think that an additional layer, which is the props and the furniture, they can be in different metallic texture to be more delicate and more of a contrast to the rawness of the space. And the design of these furnitures will also become the playful elements of the store that gives another layer of richness to it. We try to design each piece of furniture by reinterpreting them as abstract park or street elements. And indeed, a lot of the inspiration did come from observations from ordinary items that you see on daily street life. So for instance, on the first level, we saw some of these tall concrete columns as trees in the park. So we made this display table almost as if they are a tree bench around the columns. And the design of the fitting room is also very fun. It was literally inspired by a street urinal booth in the Netherlands. We found that this porous opening on the top and bottom and at the bottom, and the fact that actually your feet or the lower part of your legs are visible in the store could be very fun moments. And on the mezzanine level, we designed a floating street fence where shoes and bags can rest on. So we really want to take these elements of daily life and set them up in a more unusual way, a more quirky way, actually. And on the upper playground level, display table that is also inspired by kids' favorite carousel. So like every design project, our clients always want to understand how you design the space through renderings. They want to see reality renderings. But our experience tells us that with this client, because they are people from the fashion industry, we realize that actually reality renders cannot satisfy them in terms of understanding space, because a lot of these people, they are so used to reading abstract graphics, abstract images. So along the process, we struggled quite hardly in terms of finding the right kind of graphics or image to persuade them our idea or to evoke their interest. So with this client in particular, we spent quite a bit of time in making not just renderings, but try to combine it in a way a collage works. We highlight the important things and then we merge them, overlay them together in every image. We think this, in a way, can offer them more room for imagination. And I think it works for me also to share some material experimentations during the design process. Because actually in this store, we are largely using outdoor and industrial material for a relatively small interior space. So the actual application of this material has been quite challenging during the construction period. For instance, the staircase, the external shell of the staircase, we try to clad it with industrial fiberglass, but actually fiberglass is usually used in much bigger infrastructure in a relatively crude finish. And in contrast, for a fashion retail store like this, we needed it to be super accurate in terms of its shape, in terms of its color, and also the finishes, whether it is gloss finish or matte finish. So this, along the process, involved a lot of tests, involved a lot of redoing the staircase all over again. And the red rubber that made up the inner side of the staircase was also not as easy as we thought. Because the normal spraying machines for rubber that is usually used in large sports ground or playground, it happens that the machines are too big and they cannot get into our site because our store is being too small. So in the end, we have to test by hand to mimic the grainy effects of the rubber ground. So you can see from this image, it's really the builder's hand taking this little towel and try to roll over rubber to mimic the effect. And unfortunately, after a lot of trials, we failed to do that. So actually the outcome is a very flat rubber, which to us is a bit of a pity. And the image in the middle, the black asphalt ground, which we originally wanted to bring into the site on the first level, it was also not possible because asphalt, as you know, is usually used to pave like traffic roads, and the construction of it involves a lot of unpleasant smell. And that a lot of neighbors would complain, the client also complained. So we had to find an alternative to mimic the effect of it. And in the end, we made it with pebble stone, which is stained in black to get a very similar effect. So it's not just these two materials, but along the construction process, we also made a lot of small partial mock-ups to look at properties of materials and also to look at if the detail is nice. And like a lot of construction in China, the schedule allowed by client is usually very short. So construction has to run really, really fast. And that gives you almost no time for extra design study if any unexpected issues occur on site. So for instance, in this case, one day when we are constructing the staircase, some people from the fire department came into the store and say, you need to add another sprinkler under the staircase. So we didn't have time to sort of go back and do another design study to how to do it nicely. So a lot of design communication is done by hand sketches on site right away, communicating with builder, checking dimensions on site immediately. And this is how the finished product looks like. The staircase has been very popular after the store opening. Everyone likes it, and because it's very successful in terms of catching attention from far, from even the streets beyond the neighborhood, and also the shape and the contrasting material that it has. It makes itself this very fun, quirky creature in the space that customers are curious and they want to ride on it. And this is a shot from the mezzanine level and a few more shots on the upper levels. Here are more the park ambience, which is surrounded by trees in the context. And in this image on the right, we've also tried to extend the first level park space outdoors with a round custom-made planter bench. This bench is also cladded in the same fiberglass finish as the staircase, and it has become a very friendly piece of community furniture where the whole neighborhood can use. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I have to share today. And I believe it's a very different kind of presentation from what Peter previously shared, which is more academic. But I hope you've learned something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself, or if you're shy, you can type it in the chat box. You can also raise your hand if you want me to cue you. Gwen says she really liked the design process and she gives you a hand clap.
Thanks a lot.
I'm actually quite curious about the Kengo Kuma project, the shipyard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you called it, but actually I use this project as my case studies in Peter's semester. So it was one of my case studies because I really like how it is sensitive to the existing artifacts, like to the level of the materials itself, and thinking about how to reuse materials like in a very detailed manner. And so I was curious, like I was intrigued by the way the brick is used, and I think when Louis Kahn asked the brick what it wants to be, it didn't occur to him that it will be a facade, like a curtain wall that can be hung on a facade, right? So I was curious, like, why is it so important to display the bricks on the facade in this project to the level that you have to do all these like mock-ups and computational design?
Well, actually, I probably did not show enough photos of the finished architecture, but so you see the warehouse has also a north side that faces the waterfront, right? Actually, the north side of it, we kept it all original. We didn't touch the existing facade. So what we're trying to create in the overall sort of building outlook is we want to create the sense that this building is suggesting a change itself. So from the north side, it is still its original texture, is still its original expression, but slowly towards the south, where the urban development also starts, the facade would change to a more contemporary way. So it is this challenge where we have to find a way to solve how an ordinary brick becomes a new brick that is floating. And that involves a lot of like tests, a lot of mock-ups, a lot of like observation also on how the old bricks look like, so that we can bring similar texture, similar color back in the new contemporary side.
So are the bricks also existing artifacts that were found in the site, or were they new materials?
They're new materials, but we picked several colors from observing the original building. Yeah, and then because after all, in the new curtain wall, the bricks have to be in a sort of dimension or a certain profile in order to fit with different hardware. So that inevitably we have to make them all anew.
Yeah. So when a member of the general public approaches the building, do they go from the side where you have the bricks, or from the other side at the riverfront?
I think now most of the people go from the north side, because only recently the whole waterfront promenade has been renovated. So now, especially on the weekends, a lot of family and friends, they would go cycling, they would go picnic along the waterfront, and actually most of the public would approach from the north side of it.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions from the chat? Oh, there are no questions yet. Please start asking questions, students and everyone.
Queenie, I can react as well without starting a question, because Shirley says we are different. Of course we are different, but there are a lot of things I like in her approach. And there are also, I think there are lessons in her approach that you can use in all kinds of designs. For instance, in the shipyard, the smart position of the old building in the axis of the new layout. If you design, in your urban design, an old building as a kind of cornerstone in the rest of the structure, it helps you in defining the space and giving it a specific identity, instead of hiding it somewhere or just in an accidental spot. But putting it, use it as a cornerstone is a smart one. And you can, it's always valuable, it's always usable in all different kind of ways. I like that you said afterwards your favorite spot was on the inside, where there was the sunshade on the floors because of the brick wall. You think your design would have changed if you realized that before in your design phase already, that it was that important and it was that kind of effect? Because in the start, you mainly show these designs and studies from the outside and not on the effects on the inside.
Exactly. And it is really a surprise to us, because it just happened so that day we went in late afternoon, and then as we arrived at the building, we saw that moment, which we never saw in our renderings, we never expected in our drawing. And wow, that's a very, that's very dramatic.
I think that also answers one of the previous question by a student, Honran, how to stay passionate and inspired as a designer. I guess those are moments where you feel your passion as a designer. Yeah,
exactly. Moments that you never expect. Yeah.
Just now you showed that there are these huge structures in this shipyard. Are they still performing structurally, or are they performing as a large size artifact for people to appreciate at the moment?
They are still performing structurally. Well, actually, because in the original building, it didn't have any floor slabs inside. So the columns were only used to support the bigger skeleton, the big shell. But then later when we have new programs, like we needed to add floor slabs for 4 levels. So that contributed to part of the structural system, but we also needed to add a lot of new steel structure to hold the new building. Yeah.
Just now you mentioned that these two experiences that you have in these different firms are quite different. Like one was more focused on materiality and modularity and building an identity, and then the other one was it gives more emphasis on like understanding the client and responding to the brief, right? So are there any similarities in these two approaches?
I would say part of the design methodology, yes, because actually both projects paid a lot of attention on material experimentation and also on detailing. Well, even though in the second project we didn't make any physical model, there's no need, and well, to be honest, there was no time for it. But I would consider like all these mock-ups that we do on site to check detailing, to check material effects, they are also they carry the same purpose as when we did physical models in the earlier project. So yes, I think that's a similarity.
Yeah. There's a question from Gwen. For the store's interior furniture that was mimicking existing street furniture, was there an exercise you guys did, or how did that inspiration came about?
The inspiration actually just came to us when we said, this is a park, because the store is also called In the Park. And very naturally, everyone in the team sees this as a park, sees this as an outdoor setup, which is casual. And this idea very naturally came to us. And in terms of like how we did it, everyone just very casually sketched what you see as street elements. So I remember Vincent, like our design principal, he was also sketching like today I went down the streets and then I see this street laundry. It has this pole where clothes could hang. Perhaps we can do a similar thing where this fashion, this clothes or trousers can hang on. And that also happens to a lot of other like items. So we were typing like playground elements on Google, and then we see a whole bunch of images, and then we start to sketch. Let's try to abstractify it, like reinterpret. Yeah.
No, I like the effort where you have the bench that goes around the column.
Yes.
Because usually, because I think usually when people deal with existing buildings, they see like these existing columns as a kind of constraint or something that is annoying in the process. But by doing that, you actually celebrate it and activate that column.
Yeah, exactly.
Allowing people to sit around and like for informal interaction.
Yeah,
that was
cool. Our client actually also inspired us in that sense, because when they decided to rent this store, they brought us to site to look at how the space is like. They already mentioned, well, you see all these crazy concrete columns in the store. Usually people would not know how to use it, but if we can find a smart way to deal with them in a fun way to actually turn them into part of the design, make it really successful.
Yeah, I think that's a very smart way to turn constraints into new opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sek Jong Chai says that they love the level of material experimentation and craftsmanship. Are there any risks while undergoing these processes, as these details are specifically designed for that certain project?
I think the risk is more in terms of time and budget that the project allows you. So, because when you do new things, you always have to do a lot of experimentations. Fortunately for both projects, the client has been generous enough, and they also have high expectation on the quality of the outcomes. So they are willing to invest a lot of time, a lot of effort, and money, of course, to let us test with these things. Yeah.
Well, those are very nice clients.
Yes. I have to say.
So like students, you don't have this constraint, you have this worry about, well, there's the time constraint, but there's no budget constraint. So you can go like as crazy as you want.
Yeah. Actually, with the second project, the red rubber issue, the client did complain to us to say, how can it be like that? You don't know like we cannot achieve this playground rubber texture in the store because that is ultimately what we all wanted to achieve. But it's really, no one in the team would know that the machine, the size of the machine cannot get into the store, and that causes a whole problem. It causes a whole obstacle. So yeah.
Is that because of all those columns?
Because of the columns and also the machine, and especially like the spraying needs a lot of ventilation to get the smell out of the store. So all this process together didn't allow it to happen. Yeah.
Let's see. Any more questions? Oh, there's not. Okay. In both projects, were there any precedent studies? And if yes, how do they come into the design process?
For shipyard, the precedent studies, well, maybe I should explain it this way, because in my former practice in Kelkoma Associate, a lot of precedent studies come from the projects that they've done themselves instead of looking at other new projects, because after all, we have to respect his own personal philosophy, right? He wants to dissolve all his buildings into the context. So we look, and he has experimented with a lot of different materials, like bricks, like tiles, like wood, on how these material would become particles themselves and then sort of flow or fragmentize. So we did check a lot from his past projects in terms of finding the right detail to connect these things. And for the other project, for In the Park, I think there's less of a precedent study. Everything just comes straight to mind. And then from the very beginning process, we already started sketching the shape of the staircase and sketching this little furniture that we have. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question from Aaron. As we know, there are a few activities and atmosphere in the building. How do you work with the transition part of two different phases in a big building scale in the shipyard? So how do you work on the transition of atmosphere between spaces?
For shipyard, I think it's mostly done by material, because all the materials that we've chosen are relatively tuned down. We don't pick any kind of contrasting material. So all this material, when they're combined or they work with one another, they don't fight with the existing artifacts. And the fact that these existing artifacts occur, or they are all around the building. There are these roof structures, there are these concrete columns, and also these old pipings that become signages that you see everywhere. So in a way, the transition itself already becomes very smooth. Yeah.
There's also a question from Yao Long. I think you have actually addressed this, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Is the 30,000 square feet project and the 350 square feet project have the same strategy process?
Not entirely. I would say not so much in the concept stage, but for both cases, we carried a lot of tests for materials and for, or like in the first project, as I've said, we made physical models, and then in the second project, we would test with real materials on site. So in that sense, we want to see things in its physicality form. So that's the similar process. That's a part of the similar process.
Yeah. What is the starting point for the shipyard project?
The starting point was to find a way for the building itself to suggest the transition from the old to the new in terms of how it looks from outside. So yeah, that's why we have the idea of actually bringing new curtain wall and then new way of presenting the bricks in contrast with the old one.
There's a comment from Li Cheng. Really like the shipyard. I enjoy the spaces when I was there. Enjoy the landscape as well as all the small details. I wonder how you react to the weather during the design process, since it was built over 100 years ago with different functions.
Well, of course, like a lot of other buildings, we have to add like new insulation layer to the building. So pretty much the same as how you design a new building.
Okay, are there any more questions before we? Yeah, there's a question from Huanran. How do you balance or compromise design when client's aesthetics is extremely different? Some would say tacky than yours and go against designers' perception of appealing.
That's a difficult one. That's something that's like a trouble that I still have today.
Maybe Peter can also share a little bit on this.
So one way for me personally, I would actually do more design studies. I would, of course, we understand what the client wants. Maybe it's something that has to do with functionality or something that has to do with budget. And then we would try to listen to them and actually do the option that they are expecting in comparison to the one that we recommend. And then we will show them side by side to see, apparently this one has a better effect and why. Like also we can persuade them with the aid of like reference images also. So yeah, I think that's how the communication goes.
I see. Peter, do you have any comments like on how to balance and compromise design with clients' aesthetics?
Yeah, usually you the point of view of your client is not as wide as our own views. They have a specific view and they have their own specific idea. And if you persuade them in other effects they didn't realize, sometimes you can help that. And afterwards, we say in Dutch, the client is the king of the project. And then we say,
we say in Chinese as well.
Yeah. And we say, okay, it's your choice to make the decision. It's not mine, but you are the client. And don't complain about if there are some effects. But I pointed you at the effects, and then it's up to you. And sometimes they get a bit, well, thinking deeper, because it's a kind of a responsibility. You cannot hide yourself later on after the decision of your architect. It's your own choice. And sometimes they get afraid of that. And sometimes that can be the option to help them, persuade them to do it a different way. And otherwise you just make a kind of, sometimes we make 3 different solutions and you connect it to a SWOT analyze and start pointing out all the strong points and all the weak points and make them decide on that. And of course there is a trick that you appoint the best solution is yours and you appoint 2 other solutions that are very weak. So they always choose yours.
There was a previous question by Junwei. I think it was for Peter, but if it applies to Shirley, feel free to chip in as well. His question is, in your opinion, have you ever faced like opposition by the public during the transformation of historical building? And if yes, how do you address it or how do you solve it?
You ask to me or to Shirley?
To you.
I think we get influenced by, because sometimes you have projects that last for a long time and you use it in kind of pop-up situations during or your design process. You use the building already to let people adapt the new function. And people are always eager to look into old buildings that are unrestored. And if you listen carefully to how people react, you can find out what people are interested in and what kind of things you didn't realize yourself discover there. And if you get smart of people who are eager to do pop-up functions, if it's a shop or a market or a restaurant or events with music, also for yourself, you discover new possibilities and new qualities of the building. But you have to take your time for that. But it influences me very much in changing my own point of view, and but it's not always possible to use that in that way.
I'm also curious about, this is for Shirley, I'm also curious about the projects that you have shown. What was the main constraints for these projects, for both projects?
For the second project, for In the Park, the main constraint I think was really time, because the time allowed to us was very short, really very short, shorter than what a normal project would take. But on the contrary, we wanted to try with new materials. We wanted to try with, well, they're not really new materials, but materials that are rarely used in interior projects. So if the client would have allowed us more time in terms of testing the qualities and stuff like that, I think it could have been more successful. Yeah. And for shipyard, I think constraint, there's not like one major constraint, but the whole process has been also quite difficult, because it involves like every design project, it involves a lot of parties, right? Like not just a client, not just a designer, but there are also the builders, different people. And it just happened that we didn't have a very good builder for both the interior and the curtain wall, actually. Well, believe it or not, the first time when we checked the facade on site, we realized that actually half of the bricks were gone. They were not in the right position. And the builder might have cheated by using less material. And so we took a photo of the facade in construction, and then we overlaid it on Photoshop with our design, and realized there are a lot of different. So then we complained to the client, and then they realized that as well. So they of course they ordered the builder to do it all over again in the right brick, in the right position, and that prolonged the whole process a lot. That also delayed the client's time. So the constraint really is to have really good, reliable parties to work with you together. And if they're not, then it can be really painful.
Okay. There's a question from Gwen. What kind of mechanism was used to hold the bricks in place?
So it's actually a hanging structure. We have this overall framework for the curtain wall on every facade. And then we have these stainless steel rods that hang down from top to bottom. And along these rods, we have these little metal clips that would hold the bricks in place. So that's how it's like.
Are the bricks performing well after all these years under weathering? And...
Yeah, they're performing well, because after all, they are new bricks and they are of quite good quality. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? Maybe we can have one last question from the public. Anyone? No. If not, I will ask one last question. Perhaps because today we look at Peter's sharing about more academic work, and then Shirley sharing on like real practice, and then where all these like hardships and constraints of the real world comes in. So I was wondering for Shirley, if you compare your design process in your practice and your design process when you were studying at the University of Hong Kong, are there any differences, or like what are the differences between the design processes?
I also thought about this just now when I was listening to Peter's presentation, comparing the current me and the me back then. I think after going into real practice, I've become more emotional, but emotional in the sense that I think it's actually easier to persuade people from an emotional sense instead of a totally rational sense. Because like, well, in like when you do academic works, you always give your design some sort of a reason. But actually, the reasons can be any kind of reasons. I really think that, like in Peter's studio, different students have different approach in terms of their research, what their point of interest in. So sometimes to persuade or to interest your client, it's actually easier to communicate them from an emotional point of view, to really create images or create a product that gives them that wow effect, that impresses them. Yeah, so I think
So
that's the big
something that is more instinctive from a human's point of view.
Yes, exactly.
Rather than like theories and
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Peter, do you have anything to add to today's session?
I enjoyed this session very much, and I enjoyed also the 2 projects Shirley told about. And there are, I think, smart lessons for students to learn. Also in the second project, where you can see that she changed the threads of a lot of concrete columns into the chance to make something specific. And think on words like a forest and a concrete jungle, and using a stair to climb through that concrete jungle. It's a smart one because people want to see and feel and experience the building. And a kind of spiral staircase. She already discovered that everybody wants to go on that. And you can look around, you go around, you go on top of it, you climb on it. That kind of experience. And I think she was fortunate to have a client that already let her focus on that. Because usually you got clients, oh my God, what a mess of columns are there. Is there a trick to move them all, to remove them all? But you didn't do that, and it's nice that you can do it like this. And I think if you got indeed an office with a lot of research, designing, technical things, you're happy. Because if you if that starts designing when there is the contractor already, you never succeed. So you're happy. I think I'm kind of jealous of your work.
So the second project is basically what Peter has mentioned just now. You change the program to fit the building.
Yeah,
you change the building to fit the program, right?
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
Shirley, do you have any last words for this session?
I also got quite inspired by Peter's presentation, because now I think a lot back then when I was designing as a student. So yeah, it's also very inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah. On that note, I also really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you so much, Peter and Shirley, for spending your time with us, for sharing your design processes with us. I think it's really interesting that we get to start seeing approaches in heritage and adaptive reuse starting from an academic point of view, and then looking at different approaches, ranging from urban, or starting with materials, or starting with something more philosophical, poetic, to practice like projects in real practice, which also have different approaches by themselves on different scales. I think that was very nice to see in one session. So thank you so much again, Shirley and Peter, for your time. And also thank you everyone for taking your time for attending our public lecture series. Don't forget to stay tuned. We also have another session on Thursday, which is more on cultural and educational spaces. And then another one on the following Monday, which is more on public buildings. So yeah, stay tuned, and don't forget to follow us on social media, which are posted on the chats. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and a good afternoon to Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
And see everyone on Thursday or next Monday.
Thank you, Queenie.
Thank
you, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ja, was leuk.